ASRM in Denver. The next talk in our studio today is by Francesca Bahr. We are going to talk about humidity in the incubation system and how that can affect the embryo or not affect the embryo. Thank you, Francesca.
Hi. Thank you, Jaco. So what we're going to discuss today is safety with non-humidified environment. And the reason we're talking about this is because there's been quite a bit of social media looking at dry versus humid incubators, and I'd like to look at all the different factors that affect how you can have safe incubation even in a non-humidified. Oops. It's not... Sorry, it's not forwarding. Oh, okay. So on the agenda today, we'll first talk about humidification and osmolality and how these two are related. We'll look at humidification studies, validation of culture in the Embryo Scope, which is a non-humidified incubator, and then also that embryo development is the endpoint. So whether you're in a humid or a dry or a non-humidified incubator, the real endpoint of what is important is how these embryos actually develop. So what we're talking about when we're talking about humidification is in fact not humidity in itself, it is osmolality. And osmolality is basically the number of molecules in a weight of solute. And this is what's called osmolality. And for human embryos, what we typically want is to maintain the osmolality inside and outside of the cell so that it doesn't shrink or it doesn't blow up. And this has to do with molecules and the concentration, basically, of the solution that the embryos are growing in. So as we know, media droplets contain all kinds of molecules. They have sugars and salts and amino acids and other components to support embryo development. If you have a hypotonic solution, that means that the outside of the molecules versus the inside of the cell is too low, this is called hypotonic solution, then you'll get that these cells will, water will rush in to equilibrate the concentrations and the cell will blow up. If you have a normal concentration, the membrane remains stable and inside and out, and there's no changes in the embryo, versus if you have a hypertonic solution, just like if you're swimming in high seawater for a long period of time, then the cells will shrink. So cells in solution need to have the right balance of these minerals to equilibrate the growth of the embryos. So the actual maximum osmolality to maintain for embryos is somewhere around 300 and 305. According to animal studies, we really don't know the upper limit for human embryos in a real system. So embryos can also use organic and inorganic osmolytes, and this includes things like glycine and betaine and other non-organic osmolytes to also control that cells do not shrink or expand. So in fact, incubators that are non-humidified does not mean dry. If you're using a type of incubator that has a gas mixer, it's taking some of the ambient air. So a proportion of the humidity in the ambient air is in fact incorporated in the incubator. So it's not totally dry, versus if you're using an incubator with a premixed gas, then you really do have a dry environment. So let's say ambient lab humidity, maybe not here in Denver where it's really dry, but typically it's 40 to 60%. And there was a study done to look at the humidity in an embryo scope, and they could see that, whoops, oh no, it's going the wrong way. I can't turn it back, let me see. Sorry. So in the embryo scope, there is actually 25% humidity because it's a premixed system in a Miri benchtop, so different incubators can be a little bit different. It was 15%. But if you're looking at an incubator that is designed to be cultured with premixed gases, then it is actually dry if you do not have humidification. So that's why many of these minks and some of these incubators, they're designed to have a water bottle if you're using premixed gas. Otherwise, it's very dry. Well, let's look at the role of oil in here, because oil actually is a very good method to prevent evaporation of media. So if you culture in a non-humidified environment, then you get evaporation, and this evaporation can create this increase in osmolality. However, having a good depth of oil prevents this massive evaporation. And it also has to do with the size of your droplet, the surface area to volume. So small droplets in a dish have a rather high surface area, and if you have a low volume of oil, then you can see these rises in osmolality that can be more drastic. But oil alone is in fact efficient, even without humidity, to control these shifts. There's also the role of the actual culture dish, so the surface area to volume of the dishes. In a droplet culture, such as in the embryo slide, you only have the surface exposed and not the whole droplet, like in a droplet culture. So the dishes actually have a role to play. And there have been studies looking at different time-lapse dishes and how the osmolality can change over 5 or 6 days. And you can see here that different time-lapse dishes some are better at reducing this osmolality shift. And here you can see on the bottom graph here, the bottom 2 lines actually represent the dishes that we use in our systems. This study by Steve Mullen was really, really excellent, and he was looking at all different factors and how they affect osmolality. He was looking at oil level, oil density, surface area to volume, and he did actual measurements and then created a theoretical model to show how these shifts would, depending on different circumstances. And what I've shown here in the arrow, you can see, is the ES8 and the IC8, and then on the left column is the millimolar osmolality rise per day. You can see that it's very, very minimal in our culture system over here. So we know that we're controlling through our dishes and oil very well. So it's about 0.96% change in a day. And it does increase. Nobody's saying that osmolality does not increase, but does it increase to a level that can be dangerous? So you have to look at the role of the culture media as well. What is the starting osmolality? GTL and GXTL were designed for time-lapse, which means they start at a lower osmolality. They contain things like glycine to control the osmolality as organic osmolytes. So the starting osmolality was designed perfectly for non-disturbed single culture. Some of the other culture medias have a much higher starting osmolality. So for example, GEMS is 285 to 295. So this is also something that should be considered when you're looking at non-humidified incubation. Now, we've seen a lot of studies, and these studies say dry versus not dry, and they don't give details actually about how these studies were performed. If you're using an incubator, where you're using an incubator with pre-mixed gas and you did or did not humidify, this makes a big difference. The starting osmolality of the media, often this is not revealed in the studies that we're seeing. The gas source, like I said, a mixer does take ambient air, so that it's not totally dry. And then the method of humidification, I see these studies with humid and dry, and humidification, relative humidity, is not even reported for these chambers that they claim they've humidified. And in fact, in many studies, they're not even reporting the osmolality. They're just saying dry, not dry, and there's a lot of study details lacking. So they're not universally applicable to all non-humidified or different culture systems. And again, the dish culture, what kind of dish was used, and were the chambers separately calibrated. If you have an instrument, CO2 sensors need to be calibrated for dry or humid. So if you're having a split system, did they also do these calibrations? This is one of the most cited studies we see about humid versus dry, and there's very, very many flaws with this. First of all, the type of incubator, they claim they achieved humidity by putting a water dish in the chambers that were humid. This is also a system with premix. But in fact, they never measured the humidity, they didn't measure the osmolality, and the fact is, this type of incubator, when you close that chamber, it recirculates the air. So that means even if you put water dishes in half of the instrument, as soon as you shut it, that humidity, if it was even achieved, would have been distributed throughout the whole chamber. And every time you open that chamber, it would have taken maybe half a day, even if you're getting a bit of evaporation. So this study is cited so many times, and there's many flaws. Also, they used extremely small droplets. I think it was 10 microliters, 3 embryos, 10 or 15 microliters with 3 embryos each, and then it was a droplet culture. And like I said, they never actually measured the metrics that they were looking at. So let's look at how we validate actual embryo development in our system and osmolality. We've done internal studies looking at osmolality shifts over 5 to 6 days of culture. And on the red line up there is the threshold that we say is where you want to stay under for safe culture for embryos. And what you can see is that with our embryo slide, with GTL, and with the 1.6 mils of olive oil heavy, we come nowhere near this danger level. We end up at around 280, a marginal 4 to 6% increase, which matches those theoretical studies we've seen. And in fact, it doesn't even reach the starting osmolality of some of the other culture medias on the market. where some of these studies were using these GEMS media with a 285, 295 in a dry environment. So this is something to keep in. It does rise. We're not denying that, but is it dangerous? No, it's not dangerous. This is another external study from an English group, and again, they show a slight increase in the osmolality, and they're ending osmolality again after day 5, and day 6 is again where our internal validation shows ending at about 280. And then media composition also plays a role. We can see that over 5 or 6 days, in fact, GXTL has a lower increase in osmolality than GTO. But again, still very, very safe. Again, after 144 hours, we're seeing the same endpoint of 279. This study was actually done here in Denver, which is really dry. I can feel it when I'm walking around here. But we looked at the MIA and the number of cells in a non-humidified and humidified. So the MIA was identical, and the number of cells in the blastocyst, which is a very important metric in a MIA test that only we do, we could see that this was safe. And then finally, exclusive to Vitrolife, we are the only ones that actually MIA test our instruments before they leave the house. You cannot order a green instrument, that's our reference. But we do mouse embryo assays before we release so that they're ready to go when you have the system. And out of curiosity, one of the MIA tests, we typically stop at 96 hours. Mice embryos grow faster. I said, let's leave them in there to see the effect. And on the right here, these are blastocysts. They'd been hatched since 72 hours. And at 116 hours plus, they were still growing. So if there were dangerous levels with this extended culture, I think we would see it. And then finally, there's massive numbers of studies, including a new one at this meeting here at ASRM, showing a statistically significant better improvement in blastocyst rate despite being non-humidified, and also against non-humidified incubators, which I've pointed out in red. So there is actually no evidence that this non-humidified, in our context of the way we use the embryo scope as the whole holistic system, is extremely safe for embryos, and in fact has shown beneficial effects on blastocyst development. So dish prep is important, do it fast, and your dish prep is also vital to starting out right from the start. And so yeah, I think I've summarized already. Non-humidified, depending on how you're doing it, is perfectly safe for embryo development and may even be beneficial. You don't get any contamination as well, and that's a huge, we've never had a contamination issue, and there's no downtime for sterilization. Another big benefit. Thank you.
Great, Francesca, thank you very much for that. You talked towards the end about dish preparation, and I think it's still one of the things that people have to pay a lot of attention to, not just the volumes of media that they use, but also the volumes of oil. And especially when we see clinics starting to use more the heavy, high viscosity oils, to be really careful about the amount of oil that they actually put on the embryo slides when they prepare these dishes.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've done studies also showing that with heavy oil, some of it can be retained in the pipette tip. So if you exclude and then you look again, there might be a little bit left. It's important to expel all of it. And then also, if you're not using your rinsing wells, remember to adjust and put extra oil for those, because they're getting filled up as well. So and dish prep, the time that you take to do it is, you know, you shouldn't do 5 at once, do it one at a time. And that's not just for our system, that's for any dish prep system.
Absolutely. I think the important take-home messages here is you need to be careful at what you do, look at how you prepare the dishes, and just the knowledge to know that the Embryo Scope as an instrument is absolutely safe, even though it's not a humidified incubator.
Exactly.
It's not dry incubation.
It's not dry, and we can document that it's perfectly safe,
yeah,
and beneficial, in fact. There's another poster here, so look out for it, showing again another study with improved embryo blastocyst development, significant compared to other benchtop incubators. So, yes.
Great. Thanks a lot, Francesca. Thank you,
you.
everybody. Bye.